think we're just waiting on two more people.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. We're just waiting on a few more people. Sorry, I know it's 5:32. We're just, I think, waiting on Michelle and Nader.
I can shoot them a text really quick.
That would be great. Thank you. Typically I have my camera on tonight. I'm actually keeping it off. I'm at home under the weather a little bit, so I'm gonna keep it off for tonight.
Nader said that he had to leave class a bit early, so he's going to find somewhere quiet, then he'll be on shortly.
Should we get started or should we?
I think so. I haven't heard back from Michelle yet, but
Okay.
I think we can get started.
Okay, I'm gonna start recording now and then we can go through the agenda. I know we have LTC on as well.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know, Frederic, if you want maybe to start in Michelle's absence, or Nader, actually, if you wanted to start in Michelle's absence at the moment.
Yeah, just give me 1 second to pull up the agenda. I just had to get out of class, so.
No problem.
Do you mind resending it quickly, Marianne? I just don't want to take up a lot of time looking through my
No,
email.
that's okay. That's okay. I have it in front of me as well. And do you want me to just go through it?
Yes, please.
So I know this. So the first item on the agenda was like a little bit of a recap, and I'm going to let Michelle in right now. And I know for one of our previous meetings, there were some questions about a video that had been surfaced online. So we were going to address that. We're going to the video, I think, at the house party. Do you want the deputy can address that right now if you'd like?
Yeah, Deputy, if you could briefly give us an overview of the situation, please.
Sure. And good evening to everybody. Glad to be here this evening. Superintendent Richardson was unable to attend, but he had me attend instead. So in this instance, so the video or videos in question, I've seen a few short snippets myself. Was related to a large house party where officers responded. It's an active case, so I won't go too much into specifics, but what I will say about the incident is that the original call actually came in for a male waving a gun. And that's the original call that the officers were responding to. Upon arriving to that location, officers document observing up to anywhere between 150 to 200 individuals that were at this party. Upon the officers engaging with the individuals at the party, numerous individuals were not listening to any of the things that officers were advising them to do. Individuals throwing ice chunks and other objects at the officers. And it did get to the point where we actually called for mutual aid assistance from Drake Police, Tewksbury Police, State Police, and UMass Lowell. There were 7 arrests that were a result of that incident. It has been looked at, it's been reviewed, everything appears proper, which is what we would expect from our officers. All the appropriate reports and the use of force reports were completed regarding the incident, and there have been no formal complaints filed. And I always caution people from making assumptions or drawing conclusions from any side of an event from short snippets of video. And the videos that I saw were definitely, not much longer than 10 or 15 seconds each. And to be perfectly frank with you, in a couple of instances, I saw officers that were being approached and touched and charged at from the front, being approached while they were trying to arrest individuals from the back. So other officers were trying to assist those officers. And like I said, it has been looked at, and everything in terms of the documentation, all the reports were filed properly, and looks like everything was proper.
Great, thank you for that. And just I don't know if you can get into it, but were any of the arrests juvenile?
I do not believe so. I believe they were all adults. Charges were ranging from disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, mostly charges to that effect. And it was seven arrests stemmed from that incident. And that was a location where I can say very specifically that we've responded to a number of times over the past few months. So it wasn't a residence that we haven't been to or that our officers weren't familiar with.
And just off that, when there's houses or places with repeated offenses or repeated calls, is there any sort of mechanism or system in place for the officers to know that house is, has been called? Or is it when they look up something, they can see the different reports from that area or house?
So that's a great question. So there's a number of ways that patrol officers would be made aware of something like that. We have an internal roll call system. So back 10, 15, 20 years ago, that would have been a big binder just with different memos and stuff that the sergeant would go over on roll call. But now it's way more robust. It's an intranet basically. So the sergeants or whoever is running the roll call still go over the information. We have TV screens in the roll call room where that'll be up on the screen, that intranet, and it goes through different notices. It could be anything from officer safety advisories, requests to do extra checks on locations if there's been alarms at locations, things like that. But then the good thing about that is, unlike the binder that we used to have, officers can look at this throughout the night. And in fact, they do, because a lot of times, let's say if a child goes missing at 8 o'clock at night, when a parent sends or gives the officer a photo, that photo can then be uplifted to uploaded to that intranet, and then the officers right from their cruisers can look in real time and see the pictures. So that's one way that officers would be made aware of that. And then when we do ComStat on a biweekly, every other Thursday, we do ComStat. So all of the command staff, the sector captains, the shift captains, and then different, members of different units and things like that will attend. And one of the main topics that we go over in ComStat is the repeat call list. So addresses that have repeat calls, the chief or whoever's running ComStat will then address either the sector captain or the shift captains and ask what's being done to remedy the matter. If it's something that has to be remedied, sometimes, a location that has repeat calls, it might be just by default because let's say it's a business. So there's, a bunch of shoplifting calls or something like that. But what really is something that always draws our attention is when it's residences that have multiple repeat calls. And then sometimes it could be a specific thing that's going on. Maybe there's been a few domestics or something in a house. And then sometimes it could be a lot of loud party or disturbance calls. And then something like that, a lot of times what we do, and we did do this in this case, is that we'll then enlist the assistance of some of our other city partners, whether it be the building inspector, even landlords, a lot of times if there are apartment rentals, things like that. And we'll engage them and see what kind of resources they might be able to assist us with or things like that. So, and that was something that was done in this case. So it's definitely something that there's a number of different ways that officers might be aware of it. And then just the repetition of going to the call. So, early night officers in this case and late night officers, just from being on the shift and then just responding multiple times to the call, they'll know that. And a lot of times, that's something where it just becomes a known address. And we have a number of those addresses, and they change a lot of times depending on if people move out or if our efforts are successful in terms of what we might do to mitigate the repeat calls. So that was a residence that was known to the officers. And like I said, had been subject to a lot of calls for service over there.
Thank you for that overview. Michelle, did you want to take over now?
Michelle, you're muted.
Thank you very much. I have a quick question to kind of piggyback off of Nader's questions. Are you at liberty to disclose? You don't have to give us the exact address. I mean, that's something that quite a lot of folks in the community probably already know. But I mean, is it fair enough to disclose that these are locations, not only that or homes that these incidents take place quite often, just so that we're not giving any mixed signals to anyone? It's really imperative that we have the community understand that these incidents have taken place quite often, that they're basically known for house parties, if that's the proper term to use, because when those videos go viral, everyone is assuming that there's an unnecessary force taken, but they're not understanding that it's a home, or there's calls taking place so many times. I guess I'm just trying to get to some understanding, like, are these frat houses? Are these house parties for college students? Are these full-grown adults, that are being disobedient? I think that I just want it to be emphasized on, because we're at a place, the climate right now is so that we're treating each situation or each individual according, to the matter. So we're studying everything or trying to determine or make decisions according to the matter. So if this is something that's always taken place, or it's taken place so frequently, I think it's imperative that we allow the community to understand, these are folks that are continuing to be disobedient. This is unfortunate, but we have to address it this way, because when it goes viral, it does look like, there's neglect on these citizens, or there's force taken, and they're showing the snippets that are giving the impression to the community that the service that the LPD is providing is a force, or it's in a manner of, of neglect. And we need to understand that each matter is being dealt with accordingly, and in defense of LPD, but in defense of the community. So we need some clarity, as this isn't your traditional home on 123 Main Street that's had a couple parties. This is something that's so repetitive, and we had to call for so much help because they're being that disobedient. I think that that's imperative that we have those discussions, and the community understands that. I think, if I'm making any sense here.
Nope, I know exactly where you're getting at. And I think to speak specifically to this one, so specific to the night in question, it's good to point out that, again, as I said, the call here was a call for service. This wasn't something where police officers were driving around, saw a party, and decided that they were going to address it. This was an instance where the call that came in was for a male waving a gun, and the call was coming in from a person who was receiving this information from a person at the house. So that's the mindset that the officers are going into as they arrive there. And then when they're confronted with upwards of 150 to 200 people, some of whom, again, were throwing chunks of ice at them, throwing other objects at them, and they're trying to disperse people. People aren't listening. And again, to the point where 150 or 200 people, and we're having to call in officers from Dracut, from Tewksbury, from the state police, just so that our officers, they're outnumbered, right? But just to make sure that our officers are going to be as safe as they can. And again, it becomes an issue where, anecdotally, I feel like I see it more now. We'll see it a lot of times where two officers are attempting to place somebody in custody, and then somebody comes up on their back and then tries to interject themselves into the arrest and things like that. But going back to the point you were making, in this case, this was a house, again, like I said, that had a number of calls for services over the past few months. And the majority of those are calls for services. So it's neighbors or people who are being otherwise disturbed that are making the call. Now, when a residence or a business or any place does become on the repeat call list, we will do things such as directed patrols, just where officers will know that there's been issues over there. So they'll go patrol over there for maybe a 15-minute, 20-minute patrol, or they'll actually park out in front of it or whatever. But like I said, that the impetus for that is going to be a number of calls for service from, in this case, individuals from the community. So this isn't, again, police officers who are proactively approaching the house. In this case, again, specifically, this was a call for a person waving a gun inside of the residence. And then when the officers arrive, they're being met with upwards of 150 to 200 people. So like you said, it's always good to have context on what the circumstances are that bring the officers there. Because to be perfectly frank with you, most city departments, the Lowell PD, Lawrence PD, Springfield PD, we probably have, we tend to have more discretion with things like parties, like you said. If we go to an instance where there's a party, officers have never been there, the people are reasonable, they're either agree to turn it down or well, some of the people are leaving, don't worry, you won't get a call again. It isn't our MO to go immediately to the first call of a party at a residence and start kicking people out. But again, in this case, specifically to the context, above and beyond the fact that there's multiple calls there prior, is again the fact that the call that they're going for is for a person with a gun, and then again they're met with 150 to 200 people. So it's a very good point that you make, that context is always good. And that's why in any case, 15 or 20-second snippets of video almost never tell a whole story. And our officers do a really good job in terms of documenting use of force. So any officer that applies a use of force has to write a report. So where you might go to a call where no use of force is undertaken and 3 people get arrested, one person's going to write that report. There'll probably be one report on file, and that'll be it. But a case like this, where multiple officers had use of forces, each and every one of those officers writes a use of force that details exactly what type of force they used, why they used it, when they used it, did it result in injury. And so, we are very, very focused on documenting these things because, it behooves us because we're articulating what justified us to use this type of force, what type of force we use, but B, it just makes it, that much easier when the case goes to court and things like that for our officers to be able to explain exactly what happened. Where I would say, 20 years ago, a lot of times, your minor type of use of force would basically be subsequent to a brief physical struggle, I was able to place the individual under arrest. But now we train our officers to talk about 3 different things, which is the subject's actions, the level of volatility, and then what So subject to actions, what the officer was perceiving, and then what the officer did. And there's very specific use of force guidance in terms of the different levels of force that you can use to respond to different things. Is the person passive resistant? Are they active resistant? Are they physically assaultive? Or are they physically assaultive to the point of serious or deadly force? And then the responses go both ways. And as the person's actions either escalate or de-escalate, the responses also do. So just because a person is up at a level 3 or 4 to start with, if they start to comply and come down to a level 2, the officer still can't use the force of the level 4. They then go back down to the level 2. So it's something that we train our officers on very, very specifically. And, you know, over the years, they get more and more training at the academy level and then in service. But the main thing is documentation, and all the documentation for this incident, you know, for what we've seen in the videos, the reports document exactly what was taking place.
So you say there was 7 arrests made and they're all adults. And were any of the arrests that made the individual that was flaring or waving the gun? Did anybody locate the person that was actually?
No, there was no gun located, and there were nobody was charged with any firearm offenses or anything to that effect. And that's a case where, you know, when 5 or 6 officers are arriving and 150 people are flooding out, it's pretty easy for somebody to elude the police, because you've got the officers that have to, you know, there's certain ways you have to kind of approach something like that. You obviously can't start chasing everybody that's running away. You're basically trying to determine what the issue is, go inside, make sure people are safe, make sure nobody's injured, and then you start dealing with clearing it out. It's definitely an instance where it's not, especially with that amount of people, it's not, to be honest with you, super surprising that if there was an individual with a firearm that they were able to leave beforehand.
I'm sure. And so is there any, I mean, I don't know. When I was growing up, I attended many house parties, as they referred to them. But I haven't, and I don't even know how many years, probably 30. I don't know. But my question is there even a rule considering the climate today, having 150 people in a house, I mean, is that even common today?
I wouldn't call it common. I mean, large parties are common, and kind of like you said, obviously we have the universities, we have the university in the city, and then obviously there's a lot of, I mean, it's just, there's 115,000 people in the city. So large parties, definitely not uncommon. That size is definitely a little bit uncommon, but it does happen. It definitely happens. We probably, I don't know, I don't even know if there's a way to look it up specifically, but I'd venture to say that probably only about 10 times a year would we be calling for mutual aid. In other words, we're a large enough department where 99% of the time, at least in real time, we're able to handle the calls for service that come in. Usually when we are calling for mutual aid, this is the exact situation. In other words, I mean, we can handle shootings and stabbings with the people we have. When we're typically calling for mutual aid is in an instance like this, where we're just outnumbered by an exponential number. And that's when we have to call in for our partners. So like I said, I mean, in not real time, like if we're investigating things, we always call our partners, whether it be the state police, if we're looking for canines or forensic help, or help with drones or help with different things. But in real time, when we're calling other departments saying, hey, can you send officers? That's pretty infrequent. We do it probably a little more often. In other words, so like a Dracut PD, they'll call us, probably a few times a month. Not usually for something like this, but just because, let's say if they've got 4 officers on the road, 2 officers are at this call, 2 officers are at this call, and they have a crash that they need somebody to respond to, they'll do that. But even that, to be honest with you, isn't very often. It does happen, like I said, a handful of times if Tewksbury will call us or Dracut will call us for mutual aid. But when we're calling for mutual aid, it's usually something like this, where there's just literally such a large number of people that we need help, just numbers wise.
Nader actually wrote in the chat regarding the levels of use of force. Is there a chart or infographic of the levels?
Yeah, so if you, I don't know what it would be called. It's all over the internet if you Google it. Use of force, probably hierarchy is what it would be. It's the way you'll notice, if you do a Google image search of that, The one that ours is based on, which the majority of departments across the country is based on, is going to be a triangle, and it's going to be the different levels. At the bottom is compliant. So when somebody's compliant, you know, we can do things like obviously like escort them if we're asking them to leave somewhere. And then you get into passive resistant, which isn't physically resisting, but they're not doing what we're telling them to do. So it's like, sir, I need you to move over here. If they're not doing it, they're being passively resistant. So they're not assaulting us or actively. And then actively resistant gets into things like pulling away from the officer and things like that. And then you get into assaultive, which is actually punching, punching the officer, kicking the officer, or those types of things. And then you get into assaultive, serious bodily harm, deadly force type thing where a person is trying to stab an officer, shoot an officer, those types of things. And like I said, you could arrive at a scene where an individual, let's say, has a knife. So your perception at that time, your level where you're at is going to be up in that potentially physically assaultive. But when the person then puts the knife down and now they're not doing what you said, well, now they're being passively resistant. So those levels change and are very fluid. But I don't know the exact terminology, but if you Google image search use of force hierarchy and you see that triangle, the multicolored triangle, for the most part, that's what it's going to be. And it's going to tell you what the officers, what the person's actions are, what the officer's perceptions are, and then what the reasonable response is. And we always tell officers to articulate that, because I might see an individual from behind and it looks like he's just standing in front of an officer, but the officer, so I might say that he's just not doing what the officer's telling him. So I might see him as passive resistance, but the officer who can see him from the front might see that he's clenching his fists. So that officer, what he's seeing is clenching of the fists, and his perceptions are that the person is potentially assaultive. So different officers can view different, the actions and what the officer's perceptions are sometimes can be a little bit different. And a lot of time that is because of what one officer maybe can see and what one officer can't see. And then because you have different reasonable responses, you might have officers respond in a different way. So an officer, if you have two officers that are at a level where the person's assaultive, you might have one officer pull out his baton and the other officer pull out his pepper spray. Both reasonable responses, and neither of them is wrong, just because they're doing two different things, but they're both at the same level. So yeah, use of force it's a complex topic, but it's something, like I said, the officers receive a lot of training in the academy and then a lot of follow-up training in service, and things change, so then when we got tasers, now that opened a whole different range of options, but then also a whole different range of, because you can do certain things with the taser at one level and certain things with the taser at another level. So and then things that just best practices sometimes change. So use of force is something that's kind of always we're always training in, and similar to how we recently got the virtual training system. So that was something where we were able to do some really realistic simulation type use of force exercises, because you can only really simulate what a real use of force situation is going to be like. You can only simulate it to a certain degree, right? So if we're at the range and there's a target on the down at the end of the range, and they say, now the person's pulling out a knife. Well, you're looking at a paper target, but with this virtual system, it allows the officers to be more now in almost a 360 thing, and they're actually physically seeing the threat or potential non-threat, but then the threat or the non-threat is responding to what the officer's doing. So if it's a person who's maybe just having some sort of mental health crisis and the officer is doing a good job of de-escalating, the person running the program can make the subject that they're dealing with de-escalate. So it's really something that's, I'm going off on a tangent, but it's something that we're, like I said, we're always looking at ways to make sure that our officers are trained the best they can be in terms of use of force, because it's such a complex issue.
Thank you. So if no one has any questions or concerns regarding this incident or any further comments, I'd like to go on to the next couple things that we have on the agenda, if that's okay. So we have had some discussion with regards to seeking some updates on if there is any on the body cameras, if you have any, please.
So, yep. So very good news on that front. So we actually, through the city, we just put out what's called a request for proposals. So because it is, because of the amount that the expenditure is going to be, which is going to be very high, this is the process that the city utilizes. So it was February 7th that it was released, and you can actually see it if you go, if you Google search City of Lowell RFP, request for proposals, there's a website that lists all the current RFPs. So that one went up on the 7th. It's open until March 1st. And what that means is basically that any companies that qualify in terms of the general qualifications that we ask for can submit a proposal in terms of what they're able to provide us. So I'll be brief about it, but so the things that we put into that RFP, the evaluation criteria that we were looking for is very thorough. So we were looking, so we want the companies that are going to put in for this, we want to know their experience, their reputation, and that's broken down into a bunch of questions. The maintenance on the body cameras, the warranty on the body cameras, the repairs, potential repairs on the body cameras, and whether or not these companies are able to support us with that. Durability of the cameras, ease of use, training, what kind of training that the company is going to provide us, what kind of assistance they're going to provide us in terms of implementation, right? So installing the required equipment at the station, in the cruisers, the compliance, do the cameras comply with CGIS, the recording format, the resolution, something like format is important because, there's, to my understanding, there's some companies that use proprietary video formats. So, and then there's some companies that utilize, your typical MP4 or things like that, where it's much easier for us to, download or manipulate things like that, not manipulate, to store or whatever we want to do. Then we were asking these companies about how they are stored, they're uploading, the sharing capabilities. How can we share these videos with the district attorney's office so they can be shared with defense attorneys and things like that. Battery life, how do the body cameras get charged? Do they get charged at the station on a charger? Do they integrate with our taser holsters, with our radios, with our vehicles? And then something I had mentioned at the last meeting I attended, what kind of evidence storage do we have? Because I think one of the real good byproducts that will come from the body-worn cameras, above and beyond the body-worn cameras themselves, is that most of the big names in body-worn cameras have very robust digital evidence systems. So what this is going to allow us to do is to centralize our storage of not only videos, but then photographs and things like that, because a large part of our investigations that our criminal bureau does is going to be photographing crime scenes, photographing accident scenes, photographing injuries to individuals. So there's a lot of logistics that go into not only storing those here at the station, but also providing those to the district attorney's office, providing them to defense attorneys. The amount of USB jump drives or disc CDs that we have to burn and provide, or that they provide to us, is actually really high, especially when you get into really intense, murder investigations, shooting investigations. You're talking about all kinds of photographs of the crime scene, of the injuries to individuals, of possibly suspects, depending on that, and then videos, surveillance videos, right? So a lot of our murder investigations have all kinds of surveillance videos, not only from businesses, but then also personal, person's houses, Ring cameras, Blink cameras. There's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of logistics into storing and stuff like that. But for the most part, the larger body-worn camera companies have all implemented robust digital evidence systems. And I had mentioned it before, which will make it much easier. So, we could, from our side, from the administrative side of the software, say if the district attorney's office is looking for all the photographs from report number 22 dash whatever, we can give them admin permissions to then log into our system and then download those right to their computer. So it avoids those jump drives, those CDs that we have to burn, or different online, I don't want to say brand names, but things that allow us to upload, then they can go onto that site, download. So it's something that
Synchronize.
I think it's going to be a really good byproduct of going to body-worn cameras is going to be really modernizing our digital evidence capabilities. But like I said, so the good news is that all those proposals have to be in by March 1st, and then it's going to be a matter of putting together, not putting together, but looking at all those proposals and really sitting down and talking and thinking and looking at what's going to be best for this department. The initial rollout for the first year will be 30, and then years 2 and 3 will bump it up. I don't know the exact number. I think it's 215 more.
Yep.
So the first year is a pilot on our end, in terms of learning, how to use them, the real ins and outs of, the policy, public records requests, things like that. But that's just going to be the first year, and then, years 2 and 3, it's going to get rolled out to everybody else. So it's going to be the first year will be 30 officers. So what's that? Maybe 1/7 of the department. But then years 2 and 3, we're going to bump it right up to the rest of the officers. So it's going to go from 0 to the whole department pretty quickly.
Very good, very good. So did I understand correctly? You'll have proposals in by March. How long will it take you to make a decision as to what company or agency will be selected? And then thereafter, when will it actually roll out again? I think
so we'll have to go through. It's almost like there's a grading process, and it's right in the proposal. We break down, generally speaking, how we'll grade the answers to all those questions and all those things I just told you. And I'm sure I'm missing a couple. For each of those, there's, let's say, 5 questions or 8 questions that even expound on that. So warranties, how long is the warranty? How do you back the warranty? Do we have to pay for the warranty after the 3 years? Things like that. So they'll all get evaluated. I'm sure that will take a little bit of time. I mean, and not, I don't know if that's a month or maybe weeks. It's not an overly ridiculous amount of time. And then it's the more the logistical end of then getting a contract, and then obviously doing the legal part of that, which is making sure that the contract's good to form, making sure it's fair for us, fair for them. And then once it gets implemented, the majority of these companies, the major players, are all big companies. So I don't think implementation, especially when we're talking about 30 to start with, I don't think that's going to be very long at all. Because like I said, most of these companies are big companies, and they've rolled it out. We are far from the first department in the country to get them. So they've probably on their own worked out their own kinks in terms of how many guys they have to send out here to install the stuff in cruises and or install the stuff at the station. And we have a very good MIS team here. We have a very good team of garage workers that do all the work on our cruises and stuff like that. And then all the backup vendors and stuff that do our radios and stuff. So once we pick it and get the contract, I don't think it'll be a ridiculous amount of time to get it going. I don't know if Marianne might have a little more insight, because she's probably done more RFPs than I have in terms of, from the day that they're all in to how long. I don't know if you've got an estimate, Marianne, on what you would think maybe would be a timeline.
Well, I think we're going to try to be a little more aggressive on this with the scoring of the RFPs, aggressive on the timeline, I should say, where ideally the people that are going to be scoring the RFPs within the department will, have probably a 2-week block to be able to get the scoring done and get that all has to be submitted back to purchasing. Then from there, once they're selected, once the scoring criteria is done, then we're able to see the pricing. So the way the RFP works, we don't see the pricing up front. We're just looking at the criteria that we set forth in the RFP. Once the scores are done, then we're able to open the pricing packets from purchasing, and then make a decision based on all the information that we have. Once the decision is made, all the information goes back to purchasing, and they start the process with the law department to create the contract. Now, I know in the proposal, and Nader put this in the chat, we have an April 1st, the preliminary rollout begins in April 1st, 2022. That is aggressive. So we really are trying to meet these deadlines because some of this is also grant funded. So we want to make sure we get this going as soon as possible. But then once we have the contract in place, there will be some, obviously internal training on, for the officers that are selected for preliminary rollout, and for the, in regards to like public records requests and things like that, we'll need some internal trainings to be done, and then implementation. So those are the steps that will lead up to the 30 being rolled out, 10 on each shift, like we mentioned previously.
Right. So it's with all, it's still going to take some time, but respectfully, it's not something that's being stalled out. You're working on it pretty aggressively from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I will say that the purchasing department over at City Hall was really responsive and quick. Like when Marianne and I got to the point where we kind of had our criteria drawn up, from that point to actually having the RFP put up and then put out to potential proposers was very quick. They definitely were quick and responsive to get it right out there.
And I just
that wants to be looked into very carefully, because it's not just not that any any situation for any police officer or any community member should be taken lightly, especially when anyone's life is at risk. But I think that this is probably going to be one of the most sensitive things that you're doing research on, because it's evidence, no matter how you look at it. So whether it's in defense of the civilian or the police officer. So I think that doing extensive research on it is very important. So instead of just throwing anything out there, it's better to throw, the best out there if possible.
one more thing. I'm sorry, Nader asked in the chat too about is there an incentive in the scoring to buy Made in America body cameras or American body camera supplier? And I don't believe that's part of the scoring process. Not the criteria that we were looking at the body cameras. I don't know if that on the, because we're also following Mass General Law 30B. I'm not sure if that's part of those purchasing guidelines. We'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Is anyone else doing scoring process that you know of, Nader, or is this just a general question for the Lowell PD with their process of making a selection?
I just know that sometimes like they'll within the criteria that they do, they give extra points or they favor American manufactured products. I know the federal government and their procurement process, they usually do that as well.
Does anyone else have any questions with regards to the body cameras so that we can move on to the next item before we run out of time? Okay, great. So the next item that is up for discussion is the neighborhood meetings. And so basically every month, all of the neighborhoods, all of the districts hold their neighborhood meetings, and a number of community members within that district attend these meetings, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. So we have decided that we would attend these meetings, at least, one of us or a multiple of us, to try and make some presence to these meetings and, obviously introduce ourselves and what we've accomplished, what we're doing moving forward, and, be part of the agenda so that we could gain some insight from the community members within that district that attend the neighborhood meetings, just kind of get some information if they have any questions or concerns that they would like to share with us, so that we could bring it back here and have it, leave it up for discussion with the committee and of course, Lowell Police Department. So we started, and Lucia and myself have attended. I attended a Zoom for South Lowell, and I attended in person for Pawtucketville. And there's still a number of them that we would like to attend, and we anticipate to attend. But the reason we're bringing it up for discussion is because we think, it was a discussion amongst Nader and Frederic, and I believe everyone agrees. And we just kind of want to make sure that everyone is on the same page within the committee as far as being informed of the meetings, being available to attend any of the meetings, if you want to be put on the agenda to speak about anything at these meetings, because we want to make sure that we're bringing back to the Lowell Police Department, at least, you know, for these meetings, these committee meetings, any information that the neighbors might be having, or any questions or concerns or information that they might have that is not reaching the Lowell Police Department. And my question with regards to this is, has anyone had any experience, and this is for the Lowell Police Department, anyone can answer within the Lowell Police Department, has anyone ever attended these meetings that's ever had an incident that they were not called upon, that the citizens or civilians or community members have been concerned about? I think the reason for my question is because when we attend, any of us attend these meetings, we want to make sure that we're going to be bringing back and forth, you know, information of value and resources of value. So has anyone had any experience where there's been any incidents that have never made it to the Lowell Police Department?
So I do attend these meetings quite frequently, and there are officers, usually the captains, that attend, and they do the crime report. And then similar to what Michelle, you had mentioned before in regards to addresses that they go to, you know, they do share it with the communities, the neighbors that come and attend these meetings. And what happens is that then the captains or the officers that, if they're not they bring it back to their sectors. So then they talk about it in their sectors. And then they'll note it, they'll make a report on it, and they'll, like, you know, for instance, if we needed, so the South Lowell meeting, one of the requests was that, you know, that the bunting area over on Boylston Street, there's been a lot of dumping, a lot of people defecating and leaving their stuff over there and stuff like that. So the next day I had emailed to Captain Kilmartin to let him know about that issue, and also to increase patrols on the late night shift. So those are some examples that we do that would happen, but it always goes back to the sector captains, and then they then trickle it down to the officers depending on what the request is. So for instance, like, you know, if we have potholes, or if we have there's a lights out or like a tree branch, Shauna Forcier from the neighborhood liaison in the city manager's office, she takes care of that kind of stuff. Or she'll submit it to the appropriate department. We, as far as the police department, when we go, you know, if anybody has any questions, like for instance, what you had talked about earlier on the meeting, you know, the house parties, it's an address that the officers know about, the neighborhood knows about. So whenever there's an issue and stuff, there's always somebody in the neighborhood, you know, either calling the police to go over, again, this house is having a party. So people are making it aware and stuff and talking. But one of the issues with the neighborhood meetings is that it doesn't represent the whole neighborhood, right? And even the community itself. Then the people that live in the different neighborhoods, they don't all attend these meetings, or they don't even know about these meetings, or whatever. So it really brings a community to let everybody know about these meetings who may not be, but then it's always a select few people that come. But when it's on Zoom, actually we get a number more people attending than we do in person. So moving forward, some of the neighborhood meetings have decided to do bi-monthly meetings. I just wanted to let you guys know that Tyler Park, their meetings really is to set forth events that will be happening during the summer. That's when they start talking about either cleanup in the neighborhood, and they also have summer concerts and summer movies in the Tyler Park area. But Captain Kilmartin also represents that area as well too. So.
Okay, so I just want to thank you for that information, Malika. I just want to make sure that we all get an opportunity to either, you know, attend any or introduce ourselves, and you just make ourselves, you know, available to them. So what I did was I'm basically kind of introducing myself more to, let's just say, like the president of the committee for that neighborhood meeting. So if there's anyone reaching out to him in particular during, whether it's during the meetings or not, instead of having like all these people bombard us, you know, it's better for each president to be able to have access to us. And that way, if there's like a list of concerns, whether there's concerns, questions, comments, whatever, they can relay it to him. That's what I'm saying to them. If they're relaying anything to you and you feel that it's something that we could probably work on as a committee and bring it to the local police department to find resources before our monthly meetings, I'm open for that, because you have to leave, at least this is my opinion, just kind of leaving them a little open line of communication instead of kind of waiting for month to month for a resolution on something, of course, unless it's something very serious. But I mean, that's what I intended to do with anyone that wants to attend. If anyone else has any other, you know, ideas or suggestions, please feel free to share them now so that we could work on attending these meetings collectively. Because if you're attending them, Malika, that's phenomenal, but we also want to be able to attend them as community members. And like you said, there's not everybody in the neighborhoods attending them, but if they see that there's actual members of the community that are going back and forth with, you know, these meetings, maybe they'll be a little bit more open to share some other concerns that they might have on, you know, in the back of their mind. So if there's anyone else that has
No,
any,
definitely.
sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, the community meetings, I mean, the neighborhood meetings are open to everybody. And I think it's great that you guys want to attend these meetings and make yourselves known to the committee and known to the neighborhood presidents and stuff like that about the Citizens Advisory Committee. I think that's great. But another thing too is that we also have to be able to know what our role that we play as far as like being on the Citizens Advisory Group too, right? So issues and stuff that may not be brought up in the neighborhood, and if somebody reaches out to you, you know, meeting with either the deputy or the chief and Marianne first to kind of, you know, troubleshoot it. You know, is this something that we can bring to the committee and stuff, or is it just the same old, like, you know, this house is just like partying all the time, you know, and like, or there's like random cars, you know, dropping off at like all hours of the night, stuff like that, like repetitious things. I think that those things that we can bring over to the sector captains, but not necessarily to this committee. Do you know what I mean?
Right. So it's kind of like,
I think it's great to educate ourselves.
Sorry. So that's what and this is great, why this conversation had to come up, right? But I guess that's what we're at too, is gathering all that information and being able to, because Frederic and Nader and I have our own private conversations, right? And so we gather information and then we discuss it before we come up with what's going to be discussed, you know, moving forward. So we would apply that same process. So any information, anything that we gain, any knowledge that we gain, we would filter it before we throw it out there. And I think, but we're not going to gain anything unless we're attending the meetings, right? So that's why I wanted to bring it up, because then that way we could, you know, discuss it amongst us, ask Marianne, and then present it in a way where we're having healthy conversations. And what can we do for these, you know, community members that are sharing these concerns? If it's something that's already been worked on and addressed and it's repetitive and there is no solution, or the right solution just hasn't worked, or no solution hasn't worked yet, then we still should work on finding a resolution for something. And we can't unless we're bringing it up. So that's basically where I'm at with that. And I just wanted to see if there was anyone else that had any ideas and suggestions, because yesterday Lucia attended a meeting that I was unable to attend and there was no one there. So how can we find out if they're really having these meetings? That would be helpful. And if
did she go to Back Central? Lucia, did you go to Back Central? Because I was over at Belvedere on the Zoom. Did you?
Yeah, I went to the St. Anthony's Hall, Back Central.
Yeah. So since these meetings, another thing too is that these meetings do get scheduled, and they're slowly starting to get back on track because of COVID. They've really laxed a lot. A lot of these meetings haven't happened. Back Central hasn't happened in like a really long time. So yesterday's meeting, I wasn't there, Lucia. If you said nobody was there, meaning like community members or like nobody at all?
So I went to St. Anthony's Hall, and it actually said St. Anthony's Hall. And on the first floor, there were like some, I think kids like taking religious education classes since it's like a Catholic church. And one of the teachers there, she verified with me, yep, that's St. Anthony's Hall. And she said that if there was a meeting, it would be on the second floor. So I went on the second floor, it was like completely dark. But I
Those,
So
still
those
like,
that's good to
those
that's
ones
good
are
to know.
actually, yeah, those ones are actually in the
Yeah.
basement.
yeah.
Those are in the basement there. And generally speaking, attendance on those fluctuates. I know a few months ago when there were some issues in Back Central, there was a higher attendance than usual. And that kind of goes to what you were saying, Michelle. Sometimes attendance is almost depending on how things are going in the neighborhood, right? So when there's a major issue or there's been a bunch of crimes, a lot of times that'll bump the attendance. And then sometimes you're just going to have low attendance. But to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, it really is a way for us to get a better pulse on what a specific neighborhood or area wants, because a lot of times we'll go to the meeting maybe with our stats, which a lot of times are the more serious crimes and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. We have a downtick in this, that, and the other thing. And then the second we're done with that, maybe the conversation switches to parking or loud parties. But that's good for us because that way we know, calls for service are calls for service, and we're going to respond to them. But it's good for us sometimes to know what the pulse of the neighborhood is, like what their actual concern is. And most of the time it is going to be usually quality of life stuff. Again, loud cars, loud parties, things like that. But it allows us when there are people there to really get a feel for what the actual neighborhood is concerned about. And then kind of also speaking to what you said, a lot of times too, we almost always, in terms of stuff that isn't reported, we run into that a lot where, a lot of times somebody will come to the meeting and be like, well, I've been having this problem with my neighbors, but I didn't want to call you guys or whatever. We always tell people, call us. Like, we are here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. And you know what? Sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning, the officer's looking for something to do because there's not a lot of calls for service. So we always tell people we would rather respond in real time to what your issue is than respond afterwards to a crime that is already done that we can't prevent. So that's almost a lot of times one of our biggest messages is call. Like, if it's of concern to you, call, because it's harder for us to address an issue after the fact. But if the individuals who are causing the disturbance or the individuals who are involved in whatever the issue is are there, we can at least address it or identify who's involved and have a better plan. Because I know at that Back Central meeting, a few things came up. Some of the business owners brought up some things that were happening at their businesses that we were completely unaware of. So it was actually great for us because then we were able to hone right in on those business owners, and we had our district response guys go over there and actually talk to them in real time and say, hey, when this is going on, make sure you call. We'll come out. And we have a lot of positive benefit from that. But again, it's always, I didn't want to call you guys. It's like, no, please call us, because it's better for us to prevent than to respond to the crime that's already done. It's always better for us to be able to interact with the actual people that are involved, as opposed to only being able to hear, let's say, one side of the story, or not even be able to talk to anybody if everybody's gone by the time we get there. So that's one of the things that always comes up in neighborhood meetings is and we tell people too, you don't have to give your name. You can call anonymously and tell us something's going on, because sometimes that's the concern too, as well. They're going to know it was me that was calling. Nope. You can tell the dispatcher when they ask you for your name. Nope. I just wanted to let you guys know that the party's going on right now. It's at this such and such an address, and we'll come over. For the more serious stuff, obviously, a lot of times we like to talk to people, but it's completely by choice if they want to identify themselves. But we always want the call, because we always want to be able to deal with it when it's happening or before it's happening, as opposed to afterwards.
Michelle, I'm not sure if you saw the email that I sent this morning in regards to your response for the neighborhood meetings. I think it's great, or at least this month, for you all, whoever does attend the meetings, to introduce yourself first and then ask to be put on the agenda for next month. Just because they already have their agenda for this month already, and it doesn't well, if there's other issues and stuff like that, like I'm sure since you've been into other meetings, there's always time for questions or other issues that go on. But I definitely think that having you guys on the agenda for next month's meeting so that way you have time to speak and
exactly.
introduce it. Yeah.
That's great. That's the process. That's the approach that I have, that I've done so far. So that's validating. Yeah, that's the approach. That's good. Does anyone have any comments or any suggestions with regards to the neighborhood meetings? Anything to
So one question, I'm just wondering, I don't know like how many different neighborhood meetings, like I know there's like the one in Pawtucketville and then the one in Back Central. I'm just wondering, Deputy, if like you know if like if you have access to like all the neighborhood meetings that are like in Lowell, so that as much as possible the police officers can attend those meetings to like have information.
Yep. Yeah. So between Malika and then Shauna Forcier and then our district captains, the schedule goes out. Like Malika was saying, a lot of times it's the captains that are going to attend, the sector captains. Sometimes we'll have supervisors on the shift attend. And to be honest with you, sometimes the officers will go. So our neighborhood action unit recently kind of switched up a little bit some of their functions. And one of the things that we are looking for them to do is for them to go as well, because a lot of times they're the kind of initial response to a neighborhood issue like that. Like, perfect example. So if you were to attend, let's say, the Back Central neighborhood, and they somebody there was to say, hey, you know, there's these 3 houses over on whatever street, and I've seen a lot of activity coming and going there. A lot of times, to start with, it's going to be the NAU that we're going to send over there and say, hey, can you guys do some extra patrols over here? And then the day shift district response guys are going to go as well. So we've been doing that. But I know, and I don't hate to sound like a broken record, but in my 20 plus years here, I have gone to so many community meetings. It's like ingrained in the officers here, because a lot of times they do go when they're patrol officers. And definitely when you're a street boss, and I mean, when you're a captain, you go to a bunch of them, but it's something that we've been doing for a long, long time, and something that the ladies and gentlemen, the officers that work here are very comfortable doing. And a lot of time it's again, it's especially for getting a pulse on what the neighborhood really has an issue with, because sometimes, you know, we're going to be thinking that the issue is, oh, it's the dirt bikes over, and I know we're going to go, you know, we'll go to this meeting, they're probably going to talk about the dirt bikes, and then it's something completely different. But it's good for us to know, because you know, that's the way, you know, plain and simple. And we say this a lot of times, like the neighbor, everybody, the community is our eyes and ears, because we have a finite amount of people that are patrolling. When you're patrolling, you're not always in the same place at the same time, depending on you know, how your night goes in terms of calls for service and stuff like that. You might not, even if you work an area for a while, there might be an issue that you're just not, it's not coming up onto your radar. And it always behooves us for the people in the neighborhoods to tell us. And we say that all the time. You know, statistically, at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, an officer's probability of, let's say, finding somebody breaking into cars is very low, because he's got headlights on. So whoever's on foot walking around has the advantage right there. And again, statistically, because they're driving around so many streets, it's hard. But I'm telling you, when somebody actually calls and says, hey, I'm looking at a guy right now, he's in the driveway at such and such a location, and then the dispatchers keep on the line, and now the officers are responding, and then he says, oh, he's moving, now he's in the next driveway over. Now the probability of success for us to be able to at least identify that person, if not arrest them, is like through the roof. So we that's why, like, we always stress, like, call. Let us know if you see an officer, flag him down and say, hey, this is an issue that's been going on, because we always like to address the issues before they become huge kind of out of control issues. And so, like, again, the community is our eyes and ears, and I say that 100% as a point of fact, because again, there's only so much you're going to see when you're in a patrol car or on a walking route or on a bike, motorcycle, whatever. But somebody who lives next door to an issue or always sees an issue, they're able to tell us because they live there. And Lucia's other suggestion is that somebody puts on the flyer that it's in the basement next time, so she doesn't go there and go to the wrong place.
I'll confirm that next month.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lucia.
Yeah, could I suggest that Pastor Hernandez, by the way, could I suggest that I don't know beyond the deputy chiefs and superintendent, obviously, and Mary Ann and Malika, I don't know where else in the department attends these meetings know about this particular committee and who we are. So it might be important for them to know that we exist. I mean, they may know it, but you may want to provide them a list so that if we show up and we're talking about this, that we, you know, they understand who we represent.
So it's actually funny you say that. So they're actually, so they, Mary Ann, was it you? I think somebody actually put out an email to the sector captains and the shift captains that that the committee was going to be attending meetings, and it actually kind of explained what your guys, what your function is and stuff like that. So yeah, we are actually almost we were one step ahead of you there. So it's funny you say that, but it's a great idea. And I don't know, was it you, Mary Ann? Did you send that out?
I did. I sent it to the sector captains and the shift commanders, and you know what I didn't, and I did let them know that I told the committee members that they should introduce themselves, you know, to whatever the officers attending the meeting. But I didn't send a list of names, which I should have done. And one of the captains actually proactively asked me for a list of names, and I did send that to him. But I will go ahead and send a list of names to everyone as well, so they have everyone's names.
Great, thank you.
See that, yeah, because we actually see with a lot of programs that happen in the department is that when you have a knowledge of it, it's easy, and sometimes you think that everybody else is aware of it, but and Mary Ann can speak to this as well, with just a lot of the different programs we have, like the clinicians or the co-op program. When we first started that is it's getting it out there and letting the officers know, and the sergeants and the lieutenants and the captains know that these programs are out there. And like Mary Ann said, by all means, in fact, I definitely suggest that, introduce yourself to whoever's there, if it's the captains or the sergeants or even the patrolmen. Let them know who you are, so they can put a face with a name and get a better idea of what's going on. And but it's definitely over the course of time, it will it'll trickle down, and but it's always good, like I said, to definitely introduce yourself. But it was funny that Mary Ann had sent out the email that kind of introduced you guys.
Great, thank you for that, Mary Ann. I remember you saying it's when we had a little brief, and when I did attend, he was actually finishing up his report. And just to kind of go into it a little bit, and with all due respect, of course, when you attend, you're delivering vital information for that community as far as crime. And I think that I just want to elaborate that when we go, we want to have that healthy relationships with the captains on duties, and also the board of the directors of that committee, as well as the folks that attend, because part of this is to build healthy relationships with them so that we can have that level of communication, because if there's any gap, we kind of want to help out with that. Right, so that we can bring information that's probably not being delivered to you guys because they don't consider it to be a 911, or they're afraid to speak up about something that they probably should speak up about. So I guess that we kind of want to be able to embrace as much as possible, even though we understand where we stand, and that it needs to be filtered before we bring it out to a committee, if that's if I'm making sense. That's kind of basically what I believe our intention is.
The rule of thumb I always kind of say when I go to the community meetings is, if you're debating in your mind whether or not you should call the police about something, then you should call the police about it.
Then you should call the police, yeah. Right.
And if it isn't a police matter, if it's a civil matter, or if it's something that maybe the DPW or Parks or somebody else might be better off to handle, we'll let people know, but I do feel like most of the time, if you're thinking like, do I want to call the cops about this? Then yeah, you probably do. And like I said, trust me, we have 250 officers here. We have plenty of officers out on the street 24/7, and trust me, calls for these officers are answering calls for service all the time. So it's not, it's what they're here to do, and they know it's their job. So you're never putting an officer off by sending them off to a call to at least check on something. And again, it happens all the time. If it's a civil matter, the officer will let you know, and maybe if he's able to or she's able to suggest to you the better course of action. Or again, if it's something that the DPW would be better off with, or any other city. I know that at one of the ones I was at downtown last year, a young lady was talking about one of the intersections that she goes through downtown when she's walking home, and she was talking about how it's poorly lit and how it's she feels unsafe when she's crossing the road. So it's good for me to know, so I can let the traffic division know and stuff like that. But it was good for me to know, because then I can kick her over to the electrical part of DPW so that they can fix the lights over there. So it's one of those things where we're lucky here. We have a great team citywide in terms of all the different departments are really out to help. So again, we always tell people, if you think you might want to call us about it, give us a call and we'll figure it out.
Right. And like Malika stated earlier too, like we might not have the answers, but if we even bring it to Marianne or Malika or someone that might be able to direct, individuals to the right department, that's just, kind of beating half the battle, right?
And I just want to reiterate, what we do like to reiterate to community members as well on a regular basis is, if something is happening or if they're debating whether to call or not, always call. If it's not an emergency, you call the 978-937-3200 line. Please do not send us a Facebook message or a Twitter message or anything via social media, because those are not monitored 24/7. So if you're debating whether you need to call the police or not, and it's not an emergency, you don't need to call 911. You can call the non-emergency line. But if it's something that you're trying to address in the moment, please do not message us via social media.
Yeah, it's a great point, and Marianne speaks from experience, because we've had a few over the years where somebody will send us something on social media that's something that we want to almost immediately address, and we can't do it because we don't have enough information. So then it becomes this game of messaging them like, we need your contact number so we can call you because we need more information to follow up on this. And it's not only is it frustrating, but it's dangerous in terms of we're not able to respond as quickly to something that might be potentially a bad situation. Luckily, it doesn't happen a lot, but it definitely does happen. So it's a great point to make that definitely call and reach directly out as opposed to emails or social media, because it's not always monitored. And then when it is noticed, if there's not enough information for us to follow up on, then Marianne can speak specifically to an incident we had a couple weeks ago where it took us a couple hours just to figure out who the people involved were. And luckily I think it resolved itself okay, but we were scrambling for a couple hours to try and just identify the people who were potentially involved in this so that we could make sure that everybody was safe. And it's definitely frustrating, because if the people aren't responding back to you, you're aware of potentially a situation, and now you have no way to follow up on it because you don't have names, you don't have addresses. And so great point by Marianne.
Awesome. Great. We're definitely over time, but there is one quick thing that Nader was going to discuss with regards to community planning, but I believe he logged out. But I'm going to turn it over to Zarias, because there's something that she's going to facilitate that's important for everyone to know. And it will be part of how we do our kind of committee and community planning. And then after that, if no one has any questions, we could adjourn. Zarias?
So we talked about creating a group chat just for committee work, no spam, no other conversations. So I think I got everyone's number through email. So I will create that this weekend. So be on the lookout for that. So when I make the group chat, everyone can just introduce themselves with your name, so everyone can save your number. We're gonna use this just to be able to communicate with each other more easily, between our monthly meetings, and any concerns that you want to bring up so we can put on the agenda for our next meetings. You can bring it up there. Please, seriously, no other work, no spams. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarias. So that's just going to kind of help us in case there's anyone that's learned something that someone else didn't learn, right? We can kind of have a little bit of a meeting of the mind so that when we have our meeting with Marianne, we can filter everything that we want to discuss and bring onto the agenda. Just kind of, being a little proactive with what we could potentially add to these committee meetings. If anyone has any other questions, suggestions, or concerns, please speak up now.
Oh yeah, so one question. So Deputy LeBlanc, I was just wondering if you know anything, any updates about the police cadet program that was getting started.
Yep. Yeah. So the city council passed the home rule petition, and I know that it has been forwarded down to the state legislature. So it has to once it gets passed by the state legislature, that puts into effect the ability for us to then start the program, because we have to wait for that to happen so that we can actually utilize it to hire, because of civil service law, that has to be passed by the state. But once it's passed by the state, and Marianne, you can maybe correct me, the grant is already good to go. And generally speaking, the outline for how the positions are going to be is ready to go. But it definitely has gone. It was certified by the city clerk. It went down to the State House. So I know that we have, as a city, in terms of the city manager and her staff and the council, we have a good rapport with the legislative, the individuals that are legislatures here. So we're confident that it's going to go through pretty quick. And then once that happens, then it becomes creating the positions and then posting for the positions, and should be good to go. Hopefully sooner rather than later. That's going to be a great program. A lot of different cities have had a lot of success with it, so we're excited. But it's definitely down at the legislature.
Yeah, and we're in the process of creating the job description, but I had to send an email to our the federal program manager at the COPS office because there was a question regarding the grants, because we wanted to change some of the funding, because what we realized is that we kind of put the funding a little too low for the cadets.
If you have to go, just go.
We wanted to update that. And
if you have
I'm
to
just
go,
waiting to hear back. I'm just waiting to hear back on that.
I don't want to keep you waiting. I have to take a shower too.
Anything else?
Nope, I think that's it. That's all we had on the agenda. If there's anything that Nada wants to add, we can add that for the next meeting. So I think at this point, unless anyone has any other questions, comments, concerns, it's safe to say that this meeting is adjourned.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Record.